Welcome to our next discipleship class. So, last week we talked about what atheism is. We went out to the atheist.org website and figured we'd deal with some more direct responses as opposed to just a general presentation. And today we are actually in the section of the website where it talks about ethics. And so, in our What is Atheism series, Ethics Without God, that's what the website promotes. That is their position. And so we're going to give, again, a Christian response to that as we get into this. All right. So this is what we're going to follow for an outline. We are going to look at ethics, ? From an atheist standpoint from their website. We will give responses to that, and then they have an actual article that they walk through. I'll pull some pieces out of that, try to respond to it, and we'll see if we can do a little justice here, at least from the standpoint of a Christian perspective. I do realize that this is not palatable for a lot of people that are atheists or anti-theists or however, but this is for our learning. I will try to do my best to try to make this as accurate as possible. So this is actually what it says on the atheist website. This is their quote, and the reference is down below. One of the first questions atheists are asked by true believers and doubters alike is, if you don't believe in God, there's nothing to prevent you from committing crimes, is there? Without the fear of hellfire and eternal damnation, you can do anything you like, can't you? So this is, at least from their perspective, how they feel that I'm guessing Christians present to them or ask them questions, and which is really not a great apologetic. However, this is what they're sensing from us. I'm gathering as Christians, though that would certainly never be the first question that I would ask a person that's an atheist. So in response, let's walk through this. This statement is an introduction on their website that continues to affirm that atheism is not a belief system. In other words, they try to drive that home. However, people can choose what to believe, but not whether to believe. And I think that we need to remember that. Everyone believes something about what they know, otherwise they would not have an opinion, an ideology, or a worldview, and atheists certainly have many opinions. So I think we need to be fair with our basic definition of words and categories as we walk into this. So continuing the response, even the person that says they don't know if God exists, know they don't know, right, what they believe or don't believe. So, I can take the position as an atheist and say, look, I don't know if God exists, so I'm just not going to believe that. But that is still, though I'm not believing in God, that's part of my belief. That's a decision that I come to. Opinions, ideologies, worldviews, they all require thinking, analysis, and conclusion. We have to do that with everything. The conclusions of atheists is what they believe and don't believe, right? Denying or not affirming belief in God reflects a belief nonetheless, right? That there is no God, there is no avoiding this, really, logically. I don't know, why they shy away from the concept of a belief system, but they do. So atheists confuse the positive belief in God with having a belief at all. They mistake a negative belief as having no belief. In other words, well, I just, I don't know if God exists, which technically is agnosticism. But, if they say, well, I don't know whether God exists or not, So I'm not an anti-theist. I'm not against, it's not like I'm taking the position that I've searched the universe, I've searched all the, the non-material aspects of existence, and I've found that God isn't there. However, if with whatever evidence that is available to me, I come to the conclusion and I say, well, you know what? I just don't think God is there, so I'm just not going to believe in him, or regardless of whether he's there or not, I don't want to believe in him. That's fine. But that is still part of the framework of what a person believes. Just because it's negative, like I don't believe in God, doesn't mean that there's no analysis to get to that place. That's not like the standard place to be, and then anything that has to do with God is the non-standard. That is an a priori assumption, I think, that would be a mistake. But anyways, this is a conclusion that defies the definition of what belief is. So, look, belief is positive or negative. I guess if you assumed from the standpoint that, okay, the truth is that there is no God, that we evolved, then, saying that, this group believes in God, well, they choose to do that, and they choose to do that because they live on Fantasy Island or whatever, from an atheist perspective. But to be rational, to be normal, to have the basic framework of what people should be, then that's where we are. I think that's a mistake. That's assuming a lot, and that's also before anything is brought out in evidence, that's taking on a position that you're assuming your position is correct as an atheist, and then everybody else is incorrect, which again, Christians get accused of all the time by atheists because they think that we assume our position is correct. But everybody should come to whatever position they have, whether they're an atheist, whether they're a Christian, or anything else in between, in any kind of belief system, should be based on evidence, not just whimsical thinking or desire. Now, as we move on, the atheists say Christians claim, as we have done, reading their piece on the website, if you don't believe in God, there's nothing to prevent you from committing crimes. Now, that is what atheists say that we as Christians typically present to them. Assuming this statement can be taken seriously means people who want to commit crimes do so because they're atheists. That's the assumption behind the question, which would mean that non-atheists don't commit crimes, which is not true. Therefore, it's really a straw man. That's not really a serious consideration for an actual question. It really builds up an artificial concept of what Christians really believe and present, though I'm not saying that Christians never do that, but I think a thoughtful Christian would not actually present that kind of question to an atheist. That's kind of silly because, unfortunately, there's a lot of Christians that commit crimes too. Though people may ask atheists questions similar to the one considered, the point of the question is not to accuse atheists of being criminals, but to show atheists have no accountability beyond themselves, right? Look, accountability moderates our behavior, controls it. Now, I may want to, and this is aside from atheism, Christianity, or anything else, just as a human being, I may want to do something like I may want to rob a bank, I may want to steal something or do something that's considered illegal. But the fact that I can end up getting caught because it's against the law, the way the laws are stated in our country, and I can go to jail, well, that accountability creates a responsibility in me, right? The ability for me to respond properly and not go rob the bank, okay? So sometimes when people ask these questions of atheists, though they're not good questions, I understand behind the question is the idea of like, you have no accountability because you don't believe in God. We have accountability because we believe in God. Now that's true, all right? Some atheists would feel as though, well, I'm accountable to myself and I just don't want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why I think the question gets us off track, because it doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or a Christian or any other kind of religion. I don't think people that have any sense of accountability, whether it's to God or whether to their families or some aspect like that, are looking to just go out and rob banks. All right. Now, some people do, and they are criminals. They think like criminals, and there's whether they're an atheist or not atheist, that's not the issue. But I think the reason for the question oftentimes is to just demonstrate the fact that there is a lack of accountability. But that's not going to bring anybody to believe in God. It's just kind of stating a fact. Atheists claim, right? Atheists say believers claim without the fear of hellfire and eternal damnation, you can do anything you like, can't you? Well, again, that's a really bad presentation from a Christian to an atheist. I'm kind of embarrassed that anybody would actually say that. But this, again, is a straw man attack against the question of accountability controlling behavior. It's not really assuming that all Christians have this perspective is really artificial. I mean, I can break down this and show that it's ridiculous, and I'm not an atheist. So if any of you atheists actually are listening, I got to apologize for the Christians that actually may be asking you dumb questions like this. The Bible does not teach committing a crime sends a person to hell, right? So the idea that because I'm an atheist and I don't believe that there's a God, or I don't want to believe in God, whatever the nuance is, to take the position that because of that, I think that a person's just going to have the fear of hell and then, or not have the fear of hell and then just go do what they want. Look, that happens, but I don't think that you can paint a broad brush with that. Anybody that lacks any sense of accountability does what they want. It's part of human nature. And again, from a Christian standpoint, we have the question answered very simply that, there's a depravity in man. There's a problem. I'm bent towards evil as a human being. So I understand that. I'm being honest about the issue. But not committing a crime does not send a person to heaven, okay? The rejection, as it says here, of Jesus Christ does. For a Christian, committing a crime is a sin. If I go out and I decide, hey, I'm not going to trust God for my next paycheck, I think I'll go rob the 7-Eleven, well, that's a sin, because not only am I not trusting God, but I'm also committing a crime that the Bible tells me that I'm supposed to abide by the laws of where I live. So this is not a ticket to hell, because the Bible teaches a man is not saved by good works, right? In other words, the Bible never teaches us that if we just are good people, we go to heaven. There is no good people from the perspective of what the Bible teaches. There are only sinners. And so the sin is laid out in some aspect of violating the will of God. God's will is for man to be as he created him. Again, this is obviously for people who believe the Bible. So the Bible is pretty clear and simple in that way. So our first parents disobeyed, and ever since then there's a sin nature that's passed on because, again, as Bible-believing Christians, we understand that people are more than just their material makeup. There is something beyond in man that transcends the simple biological material makeup of human beings. Now, again, we look at things scientifically and we realize, well, obviously there's something in man that goes beyond the material. To try to reduce it down to entire naturalism and man is nothing more than molecules there's all kinds of conflicts with that. However, for our conversation here, I just want everybody to understand that I think it would be wrong to assume that if there was a lack of hellfire in front of a person, that they're just going to go be atheists and do what they want because of their lack of accountability. Like I said, though people may do that, and I'm sure that it happens, I don't think that that is like the core of atheism or anything else. There's many people that are atheists because the evidence for them does not answer the question or give them enough solid evidence for the existence of God, and I understand that. However, I believe, and I think the evidence shows, that there is more reason to believe in God, not only his existence, but that he has revealed himself to us, than not to, because everything has to be based on what we know and then how we know what we know, but then we have to ask why certain things exist in the first place, and that's not just the material world, but also, in this case, we're dealing with ethics. Now, atheists are trying to express a reason for the existence of ethics. It's really not possible. They can talk about ethics all day long, but it's not possible to have a justification for actual ethics in an atheistic worldview. But anyways, look, the Bible teaches that man's not saved by good works, not committing crimes, but by faith in Christ, right? So belief that leads to good works is what Christianity is all about. It's not, hey, I'm going to do good things so I can go to heaven. If that were the case, heaven would be empty, because that's not how the Bible teaches that we get there. So the atheists claim, in their introduction, atheists make the previous two claims that we just went over, we responded to, in attempts to show that a Christian position is illogical and absurd. I understand that. Or at least the assumptions and questions posed by Christians are designed to show their basis for ethics is absurd. And I understand that too. But here's our response to that. In the introduction, the atheist author, the guy that's actually writing this article, assumes what Christians believe, as the quote above said, and argues against it. And again, like I said, this is a classic straw man. You kind of build up this artificial thing and then you argue against it. I'm sure there's some atheists that feel I'm doing that to them, but I'm trying to be as fair as I can on this. Atheists claim, so the article states, all people behave based on, and here's the quote, rules of sociology, psychology, and neuropsychology. We may assert as a general rule that when religionists practice ethical behavior, it isn't really due to their fear of hellfire and damnation, which was previously stated it was, nor is it due to their hopes of heaven. Ethical behavior, regardless of who the practitioner may be, results always from the same causes and is regulated by the same forces and has nothing to do with the presence or absence of religious belief. That's a very, very strong and overreaching statement. And the reason is because whoever wrote the article is making the assumption that they know why I do what I do. I don't know that that's possible. In response, how can an atheist decide what my motives are for my behavior? First of all, if I'm motivated to behave a particular way because of my loyalty to Christ, the atheist claim is incorrect. If my motivation is any different than what the atheist is claiming is the framework for it, then they immediately become incorrect. An atheist cannot possibly know what motivates people with religious beliefs, especially when the religious person claims their belief is motivated differently than the atheist claims. If an atheist says to me, well, you're just doing that because of the development of, the psychology worked into you as you grew up, and then your neuropsychology and the sociology, mixed around you, how you're dealing with society and everything. And it's like, well, wait a minute. But that's not why I'm doing it. Like, they can't assume, again, they're taking their worldview and imposing it back on us, and I think that is incorrect. I mean, it's obvious that if I'm telling a person, no, I'm doing it for this reason, they say, no, you're not doing it for that reason. Well, that's a little silly. That doesn't make any sense. So the article stated, behavior has nothing to do with the presence or absence of religious belief. Now, this is an interesting perspective, since much of the website then tries to expose the unacceptable behavior of Christians in public policy and moral issues based on their religious beliefs. So the article talks about, there's, and the whole website is like, religion people, they do this and they do this because of their religion. And then they go, well, but people don't do that based on religious beliefs. So there's certainly a contradiction there. So these claims are logically inconsistent, but is consistent with their contradictions. So unfortunately, that's what we're reading. The next one is, the article states, our sociality, that's our social relations and communities, is the result of evolution, not choice. Natural selection has equipped us with nervous systems which are particularly sensitive to the emotional status of our fellows. Response. Atheists try hard by their own choices, the website's full of them, to form sociality based on beliefs different than those of Christians regarding politics, government, and laws. This is based on their choices. Atheists cannot have it both ways. Sociality is the result of choices made based on belief, which atheists deny. Many societies around the world operate differently based on these varied choices, not biological evolution. I don't know how they can imagine that this all works based on evolution and natural selection. The response is continued. Evolution is a mindless, random occurrence of matter acting on matter over time. There is no choices in evolution. We need to understand that. No intelligence, no anticipation. I watch this stuff on TV, and they talk about, well, this evolved because this species, needed this, and they talk about it as though it was understood that the species had to have this in order to move forward. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. There's not a nanosecond of anticipation in matter acting on matter randomly. When there's no intelligence involved, there's no foresight. It's like the I love the video that the Intelligent Design Group put out. It's called Living Waters, and they go through different species in the water. Well, one of them is the dolphins. Now, there is no way for the ecosystem in a dolphin to evolve. It's just not possible. It's an entire working system, because you wouldn't have the ability to make the sonar sound, and then once it goes out, did it all of a sudden have the capability just randomly occur to receive the sound back? Not only that, it must have randomly occurred that as it was able to get the sound back in, then to interpret the sound and know what it was out there. I mean, this is like miracle working natural selection. This is crazy, because, like everything else, like your circulatory system or anything else, you don't just start developing something. What did the body make first? Did it make the blood, or did it make the heart to pump it? But you also need all the other organs, otherwise it just doesn't work. There's a simple aspect to this stuff that really gets overlooked, and people get into the weeds on all this. But the reality is that just like the dolphin's ecosystem, you have a number of things that have to work in concert at the same time. You can't just assemble piece by piece because it would go nowhere, you know. Interesting stuff. But anyways, there is no choices in evolution, no intelligence, no anticipation, etc. However, atheists choose to believe natural selection has equipped us with capabilities that can only be attributed to intelligence. Natural selection is doing quite a lot in the evolutionary model. Natural selection does not equip, however, for anything beyond biological development. It's just dealing with the physical properties of a species or some life form, right? If environmental factors overwhelm the ability of life to continue, nothing will change that because genetic information limits biology. You can only go so far. You can't extend beyond the genetic limits that a person has. People are limited by the DNA. Moreover, genetic mutations result in deterioration, not improvement. Nobody has ever demonstrated that you have continued positive mutations to develop this upward evolutionary development into more complex life, and then developing concepts that are beyond biology. The article begs the question, assuming true a priori without any evidence, what it is trying to prove, that biology can give rise to non-material aspects of human capability, such as logic, reason, value, assessment, and everything else. So, response continued. How evolution enables one to be, quote, sensitive to the emotional status of our fellows is difficult to take serious. Evolution demonstrates the most cruel and insensitive sociality in both animals and humans. Look, you can take examples of apes that care for each other and all that. Look at the rest of the animal kingdom, okay? And look at what some of the apes do to other apes, or, you know, how they attack. So there's a cruelty, there's a viciousness within the animal kingdom, I think, that we're overlooking to naively to take on that kind of viewpoint that's expressed in the article. Unless atheists have been blind to the history of man and current problems that exist in the world considering human sociality, this is a naive and false claim. Marxist communist regimes alone over the past 150 years have shown atrocities and genocide in the tens of millions. Ironically, these Marxist regimes are mostly atheistic ideologically, which reveals a severe lack of sensitivity to the emotional status of our fellows. So, I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, that's just simply not true. If we continue on, evolutionary materials are reduced to a logical conclusion that the mind is equal to the brain. This is a roadblock for atheists. Charles Darwin, their atheist hero, said, and this is a quote from Charles, "The horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust the conviction of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?" I mean, obviously, let's be realistic here, right? First of all, if man is nothing more than material, there's no external referent, right, God, for the theistic worldview, to know whether or not what man thinks correlates to reality or is the result of random material activity. If you have no outside referent, and then there is nothing in man beyond his material makeup, you know, like Daniel Dennett, you're going to try to make the mind the brain, you know, or Richard Dawkins or anybody else. And so they, you know, because there is nothing beyond, then, like Dawkins says, we dance to our DNA. Your DNA makes you do this. Well, if our DNA makes us do what we do, And if my DNA is even making me say what I say and think what I think, then why do atheists take issue with me? That must be what my DNA is telling me to say. But we know that that's not true because logic doesn't come from DNA. Reasoning doesn't come from DNA. What we're doing here, this is not the result of DNA. My conscience is not part of DNA. If my conscience was something that I made, then it would never bother me. And everybody has a conscience and some sense of right and wrong because God has put it in them. And so, if our minds were nothing more than matter, how would we ever trust them? It wouldn't be possible. Reason arises from man's ability to think, analyze, apply logic, etc. C.S. Lewis made this observation. He said this: supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen, for physical or chemical reasons, to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation I call thought. But, if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It's like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. I mean, I think Lewis really hits the nail on the head in this quote, because how do I know what I'm thinking is even making sense, or why would I even be able to communicate with other people conceptually or anything else? Because we're more than molecules. All right, next one. The article states there are two characteristics of our nervous system: emotional suggestibility and attachment imprintability. Although they are the foundation of all altruistic behavior and art, are thoroughly compatible with the selfishness characteristic of all behaviors created by the process, again, of natural selection, the hero here. Response: atheists attribute to natural selection to a miracle-working mechanism. What natural selection can do is weed out species biologically unfit for an environment. What it cannot do is create non-material aspects in living system. These transcendent characteristics of emotion, imprinting, and everything else require a theistic worldview. There's no way to get them out of an atheistic worldview. Continued. Natural selection, from this article anyways, has taken on nothing short of miraculous capabilities, which is alien to the atheist worldview. Saying biology resulted in altruistic behavior in art because atheists have this in their experience argues for theism, not atheism. That's an argument that God exists, not that he doesn't exist, because there's something beyond the material, such as altruistic behavior and art, which is you're dealing with beauty and value. These innate capabilities man possesses is evidence that man's nature transcends a materialistic worldview, since they are non-material characteristics. Altruism is associated with morality, which requires a theistic worldview to know what good is in the first place. Now, we'll get into this, but atheists can have an opinion, but they can't actually say something is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. And we'll get into why. Now, they can know certain aspects of good and bad. Everybody does. However, altruism is really, you're dealing with an issue of morality and how you deal with other people. And certainly, it's only a theistic worldview that has a transcendent referent to what actually is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, or what we should or shouldn't do. Art requires creativity and value to determine beauty, which is not part of natural, hence the word selection. It has nothing to do with simple biology. Ethics deals with right and wrong. It correlates to morality. Only a theistic worldview can actually possess objective ethics because of the absoluteness of morality. Now, I know atheists will say, well, wait a minute, morality doesn't have to be absolute and all that, but we'll get there. Hang on. Issues. The article spends a lot of time attempting to give reasons why material evolution in animals has somehow developed over time, but it begs the question. It assumes humans develop from animals and also acquired non-material aspects of man, as we discussed. Assumes a lot, actually. It's fruitless to attempt to answer every sentence, since all the connections made are based on the belief evolution has actually occurred in the way they believe, since there is no evidence it did. So I don't believe there's any evidence for evolution. I know that that may sound crazy to people who put their entire weight on it, but again, hang in there. Evolution has been dealt with in an apologetics presentation in Discipleship Class 25 in the design argument. This presentation is focused on ethics. We'll move on to ethical issues in the article, but we do need to kind of step back and at least talk about some of this stuff, right? So just hang in there and we'll move through a lot of this. So the article states that Plato's dialogue with Euthyphro proves that morality does not come from God, therefore God is not necessary for people to be moral. And I understand the perspective. So we need to examine the Euthyphro issue and the resulting arguments for morality based on answering the Euthyphro issue. In other words, if we can answer the problems that atheists are having with the Euthyphro solution, apparently that they feel Plato solved, then, we can deal with what they call enlightened self-interest, imprinting, and we'll deal with natural selection. So this is what the article states. So it says, Plato showed long ago in his dialogue with Euthyphro that we cannot depend upon the moral fiats of a deity. Plato asked if the commandments of a god were good simply because a god had commanded them, or because the god recognized what was good and commanded the actions accordingly. If something is good simply because a god has commanded it, anything could be considered good. That's number one. There would be no way of predicting what in particular the god might desire next, and it would be entirely meaningless to assert that God is good. Again, that's a stretch. Bashing babies with rocks would be just as likely to be good as would the principle, love your enemies. It would appear that the goodness of the God of the Old Testament is entirely of this sort. So what they have done is they've basically tried to find a way to eliminate the God of the Bible, and then and they feel that the Euthyphro issue answers that question. Now, very simply, we will deal with this issue of because what the article basically says, that if God commands what's good, then effectively it's arbitrary, and nobody can really know what good actually is because he could change his mind, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other side, if good is something that God is telling us to do, but it's outside of God, then God's not necessary. In other words, we don't need God. God is not. But the real answer, and the spoiler alert, is that good and bad are grounded in the nature of God. And so being grounded in the nature of God, which I'll walk through here, we know that if God said this is good and this is bad, then that's just what it is, regardless of whether we like it or we don't like it. Now, if God actually reveals why he's giving certain ethics of good and bad, or he wants a morality, then we take that revelation and then we have more of an understanding. All right, now I'll go through this, but like, for example, in the Bible, God says, be holy for I'm holy, Old Testament, New Testament. It's the same God. So that's because he wants the people that are his people, that believe in him, that follow him, to represent him. Every command in the Bible, every statute, everything that is done is an expression of God's nature. That is within the framework of the Bible. Now, I understand that I jumped ahead to the Bible, but again, though we're not going to get into it all in this presentation, there are evidences and there are really, when you talk about inference to the best explanation, we have all the evidence and it exists why we should be believing the Bible as opposed to just pretending it's some ancient book written by a bunch of lunatics, okay? So if we grant the Bible is God's word and that's how he has revealed himself, then he has not only established what is right and wrong, but he's also given the reasons why. And it has nothing to do with ethics being beyond him, because he is the eternal being that grounds reality. See, this is the thing that I think a lot of times people miss, is that God is the ultimate reality. He existed before anything else. And to try to find different ways of living without God is pretty simple. Look, people can go through their whole life and actually be relatively happy or pleased with themselves, whatever, and they can go to the grave. I think it's wrong when Christians present to atheists and say that, you won't be happy as an atheist, because there are some people that are not Christians that are living happy lives and they're doing just fine, at least from all appearances. And then there are some Christians that seem to be miserable. But that's not what determines the truth. The truth is not determined by how a person feels about themselves or anything else. The truth is objective. It's not subjective. The truth isn't what I make it. The truth isn't what I vote on. The truth isn't what I want to be true. The truth is outside of me, and it correlates to facts. I have a black control in my right hand. Well, it's a true claim because I do. I have a black control in my right hand. Well, I don't anymore. All right? So it's easy. Truth is not tricky. You can tell truth from falsehood. And this is not difficult to deal with in this way. But let's go on. So as we continue in this, on the other hand, the article goes on, if a God's commandments are based on a knowledge of the inherent goodness of an act, in other words, that would be outside of God, we're faced with the realization that there is a standard of goodness independent of the God, and we must admit that he cannot be the source of morality. In our quest for the good, we can bypass the God and go to his source. Yeah, if that was the case, absolutely. Response. Answering the first point, if something is good simply because a God has commanded it, anything could be considered good. From an atheist perspective, unless a God reveals the basis for the command, no one could know what is good or not good. Just because an atheist assumes a command from a God could be arbitrary, in other words, that would be their criteria, does not mean that the command is arbitrary or, quote, not good. Continued, in an atheistic worldview, good is unknown and therefore arbitrary, like in and of itself. Good for one could be bad for another. In other words, there is no external referent to justify an absolute standard. This is what the atheist seems to miss within their worldview. Thus, the Euthyphro issue that assumes a command by God to be arbitrary is a guess unless that God communicates the reasons for the commands. Further, if God commands what is good or bad, by definition, that's reality no matter the likes or dislikes of the people. if God exists and he says certain things are wrong, and then as Christians we say, well, that's not right to do, and an atheist says, well, that's just kind of, that may be wrong for you, but it's right for me, or whatever. Look, things being connected to God, assuming he is the ultimate reality, if he says something is good, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree with it. Look, there's Christians that struggle with some of the things that God wants them to do. So it's not a matter of, well, just because God says it, everybody's going to do it. There will be that time, right? Like Jesus said, you pray to God the Father, your kingdom come, your will be done in earth as it is in heaven. In heaven, there's no issue. Everybody's there, they see God, and God is having his will done all the time. God's worshipped. He's the ultimate reality. He is the source of all life and everything else. However, here, where God allows a person to make a decision because he only wants a relationship based on love, he's not going to overwhelm and coerce people into believing, because it wouldn't be real belief. It wouldn't be genuine. I mean, that would be like marrying somebody because you handcuffed them and dragged them to the altar. Not much of a marriage. So God doesn't want to handcuff people and drag them. Now, God gives us enough information, enough evidence, enough innate ability that he has placed within us because we're made in his image. In other words, he has put characteristics in us that are very similar to his. Obviously, ours are not infinite. He is. Ours are very finite. But he has given us what we need to examine and to make a decision whether we want to trust him or have faith in him, same thing. But he doesn't give us so much that he overwhelms us so that there's no other decision that you can make. In other words, if God just stepped into the room and said, are you going to believe in me or not? And he's actually, what are you going to say? No. He's standing right in front of you. He's doing whatever. But he doesn't do that. And he doesn't do that to all humanity because he wants people to make their own choice in reference to what else is out there and whatever else is offered. Now, some people, they're not going to have any interest in God, and that's how they're going to go into eternity. If God forces them to go to heaven, they would be miserable. Now, hell is miserable, but heaven's going to be hell for somebody that just does not want to be there and doesn't want anything to do with God. It's very simple. God loves everybody, desires to have them with him for eternity, but if they choose to go to a place where they're isolated, then that's their choice. But in his universe, anything contrary to his will ultimately be quarantined and separated so that only his will is accomplished. So we go on. Within theism, good and bad are defined, and the justification by the deity is not subject to question, since God is the external referent of all morality. In other words, what he says is, whatever he says is right, and whatever he says is wrong. But it's not arbitrary, and it's not just, hey, I think I'll make this right and this wrong. It's all based on his nature, and again, we get that revealed in the Bible. It goes on, good is then known, though it can be rejected, like we said, and this doesn't change the truth or the nature of reality of which the theistic God is the basis. When theism is understood as the biblical God, the commands are based in God's nature and are not arbitrary. They represent his righteousness, like I said earlier, like it's quoted in Leviticus, and Peter says the same thing in the New Testament, be holy for I'm holy. Man is made in God's image and should reflect his nature and character. This is what creation's purpose is. This is why God made man. Unfortunately, a lot of atheists are kind of looking down to the animal world as their ancestors when they don't realize they've actually fallen from an exalted place where God has created them. So we continue further. Theism is a single God. Just so we understand, we have to set some definitions here, not multiple gods or a plurality. Atheists don't believe in any god or gods, but theism is the only position that is logically possible and won't violate the three basic laws of logic that we discussed in the last presentation. Thus, we argue against atheism from a theistic single God framework, just so that we understand. Why do we take this position? Understanding the 7 major worldviews will give us that answer. Now, we're coming up on close to an hour, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video here. Next week we will start here. We will walk through the 7 major worldviews. That'll give us a good understanding of why the only logical and reasonable position that a person can have is theism. We'll go through the others and show why, but again, we know that there is truth, and we know that the truth is knowable. Once we understand the simple framework based on non-contradiction, identity, exclusive middle, then we realize that, well, the opposite of true then is false. If that's the case, and that's how we think, and that explains everything as we understand what we know as human beings, then the only possibility is a theistic God, because everything else becomes eliminated, including atheism, because there is no basis for the world as we understand it, and how we interact, and obviously how we think and work. So anyways, with that, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word and as you continue to dig in on some of these philosophical issues. See you next week.